I am glad to welcome you to the Candidate Experience Design course. A candidate is someone who is going through the interview process. So this is more geared towards the field of recruiting. And to anyone else who is interested, we are the ones who need to improve and want to improve it. Today is our first lesson. Today we will learn about candidate experience, which is a hot topic right now. This is becoming more and more important. The top candidates, the ones who are highly sought after, are becoming more selective. So we have to cater to them and pay attention to how they feel, what they think about the company, how they interact, and so on. Today we will be introduced to this concept and learn what it is all about. Why would someone need to take a course on candidate experience? The fact is, improving the candidate experience is a direct path to more effective hiring. And it is a must if you want to hire A players. If you want to hire top employees, the very best employees, they are usually headhunted, they are usually in high demand. They usually have options. If they have been to one company, then another, and a third, and they did not like one of them, they will not go back there. And if you want to work in top companies, you simply must know how to manage the candidate experience. This is the course website, this is what it looks like, and I will tell you a bit about myself and my experience in the context of today's course for those who do not know me yet. My name is Mike Pritula. I started my career as a recruiter and trainer at Alpha Bank. And there I already learned how important it is to create a positive candidate experience. I was probably a bit lucky in this regard because I worked in a great office. It was the Forum Business Center. It was a super modern office, freshly renovated, meeting all the latest standards. Open space, brand new furniture, new equipment, kitchen, really cool. And I worked in a bank where candidates were generally treated pretty well. So you could say I was exposed to this positive candidate experience right from the start. I was just in that environment, but I learned from it. So when I went to the STB TV channel to head the recruitment and onboarding department, the situation there was completely opposite. At that time it was 2010 and there were very bad reviews about the channel. The candidate experience was terrible. People would wait in line, sitting for an hour or two before being seen. People were giving me feedback. In short, it was a disaster and there were bad reviews right there on the internet. And because of that, there were huge problems with hiring. When I took over the recruitment and onboarding department, the first thing I did was improve the candidate experience. I outlined the recruitment process, trained the recruiters, and over time we greatly improved it. We no longer had situations where people left negative reviews or were dissatisfied with something. That's how improving the candidate experience could make things better. Then I worked at Wargaming and later at Preply. Preply was also an interesting experience. Now it's a pretty well-known company, it's big. It has attracted a lot of investment, but when I worked there, it was a little-known company. Small, nobody knew about them. And the candidate experience was how we could win the hearts of our potential employees, so they would choose us over our competitors. Luxoft, Grammarly, and other companies like MacPaw, Xsola, and so on, at deals. It was almost the same story. When I went to work there, nobody knew about them at all. And these guys had just moved into a beautiful modern office, having previously been in rented apartments. And it wasn't even the best apartment. And when I read the old reviews, it was horrifying. I mean, there were also bad reviews about the company. And this needed to be fixed. And also within a year with the team. We revamped the hiring system and greatly improved the candidate experience so impressively. We developed it to the point where our chief executive officer, who is also the owner of the company, initially just wanted to hire better people, but when he saw who was coming to him, the top candidates were coming in, and these candidates were speaking highly of his company, which wasn't the case before. He significantly revised his expectations. He wanted to see only the best in the market. This greatly strengthened the company. That is my personal experience in this area, but this is for those, again, whom we do not know. Thanks to my projects and achievements, I have received many awards, diplomas, certificates, and so on. And I have international certifications. There will be information about the Academy here, but I am keeping it in the presentation so that if someone is not familiar with the Academy, they can get acquainted too. As of today, over the last couple of years, we have become the largest online human resources academy in the world. In many areas, let us say. And in my work, I rely on best practices. In my courses, I share both my personal experience and the best practices from around the world. We have several participants. I would appreciate if you could write what you do, whether it is recruiting or human resources specialist, human resources director, or perhaps you are a company executive. Please share. I am always interested in this. So the chat is available, right? I am reading your responses. Let me tell you about the homework for now. So, we have homework in this course. When you complete them, I check them and provide feedback. And if all homework assignments are submitted, we issue a diploma from our academy. We recently updated its design. You will receive such a beautiful diploma. So try to complete everything. And we issue the diploma on the Accredible platform. It is also a great platform. I see Marina wrote that she is a real estate agency recruiter. Oh, interesting. Real estate agencies are, from a recruiting perspective, not the easiest business. There is a lot of competition, and if your agency is not number one in the city, it is hard to stand out. Often high turnover, though it might be different for you, but it's a big challenge. So, our course program consists of 6 sessions. First session, we are getting acquainted with this field. What it actually is, what it consists of, what it is needed for. The second stage is about the structure and stages of the selection process, but specifically from the candidate experience perspective. Third, how to communicate effectively with candidates, how to support and engage them. Fourth, how to conduct interviews, questions, focus on inclusivity, training. The fifth is about technologies and analytics, and the sixth is about improving the experience and connecting it to company culture. Today we will talk about what candidate experience is, why it is critical, what happens in business if you do not know how to create a positive candidate experience, how it affects loyalty, reviews, on resumes sent, what a typical candidate journey looks like, and what companies have been able to do or not do in this area. So, let us begin. What is candidate experience? Yes, candidate experience, why it is critical. It can be abbreviated as CX, and it is often written that way. Moreover, candidate experience goes hand in hand with customer experience. Currently, there is a huge focus on improving customer experience worldwide. That is, they try to ensure that customers are satisfied, that customers also leave positive reviews, and so on. Customer experience is a big topic right now. Candidate experience kind of borrows a lot from what is happening with customers, and many tools, technologies, and approaches are similar. And there is also employee experience. It is a separate topic, also worthy of a full course. By the way, I have such a course in our academy. So today we are focusing purely on candidate experience. What is it exactly? It is a combination of impressions, emotions, and evaluations that a person gives not even to themselves, but to you when interacting with you. We don't always do this consciously. We came to the company, we looked at the building, and we have some impression, we made some kind of assessment there. I remember when I had an interview at the STB TV channel for the first time. It was a terrible area of some old factory with unsightly buildings on the outside. I was walking down a corridor. This corridor belonged not to the TV channel, but to the factory, and there were such shabby walls. And I'm thinking, God, where am I going? How can a TV station operate like this? I mean, I was mentally ticking some boxes, then someone met me, some people. I'm evaluating them too, and giving myself some mental scores as well. All of this shapes my experience as a candidate. So once again, candidate experience is the sum of all these impressions, emotions, and evaluations that the candidate receives at all stages of interaction with the company from the first point of contact. It could be online, it could be via email, it could be through correspondence, or you might call them before the final decision, up until the decision to accept the job offer or decline it, and then there's still an aftertaste left. And candidates sometimes return to the company, meaning they apply again, and the company sometimes reaches out to candidates again. And whatever aftertaste was left also has an impact. That's what candidate experience is. Let's move on. How is it formed? There's a whole series of events that a person goes through when forming their impression of your company. The first is the search and perception of the job opening. But there's a possibility that the person doesn't know about you at all. In that case, they form an impression from scratch. And there are cases where people have heard of your company in principle, but for example, haven't looked for your job openings, haven't submitted a resume, haven't interacted, they just know the brand. And some impression is already being formed at this stage. Then there's the initial contact. The candidate responded. Whether there was a reaction to this or not, they were invited. Then communication with the recruiter happens, then the interview, then feedback with the final decision. Interviews can be somewhat different in different companies, and then there's onboarding. If they've been hired, or what's called post-rejection communication, how a person is informed that they've been rejected, that they're not being hired. This is also an important point. It's formed at all these stages, and in the end, the person draws a conclusion for themselves. I would like to work for this company, or I would never want to work for this company. So it all kind of adds up and results in something. That's why it's important to manage this. Because even if you don't need the person, even if they weren't a good fit for you, people have contacts with other people. People have friends, relatives, acquaintances, and colleagues. And as a rule, when people are upset, they tell others about it. Once, when I was learning to issue loans at Alpha Bank, we were taught sales, and I remembered the phrase, "A satisfied customer will never tell anyone about it." One dissatisfied customer will discourage 10 others from taking a loan from the bank. It's exactly the same with candidates. When a candidate is satisfied, it's rare for them to say, this is such a great company. Although it does happen, especially when the company has a referral program, they might recommend someone. But if a person is left dissatisfied, if they were rejected and maybe not given enough attention somewhere, this person can spread their negative experience to a huge number of people. And thanks to social networks, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and review sites like Glassdoor, and others, they can convey the idea of a bad experience to dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people. That's why it's extremely important to manage this. Let's move on. Why is this important? A candidate's psychological memory is formed not by facts, but by emotions. So you might say, well, we didn't offend them, we interviewed them, we sent them an email, but the emotion might not have been what you wanted or thought it would be. A bad experience often ends with a negative review. This is on Glassdoor, social media, and other platforms across countries. In other words, in every country there are what I call dump sites, like insider information on how a company works and so on, where negative reviews are collected. 84% of candidates say that a bad hiring experience can influence their decision to even buy products from the company. In other words, if a person didn't like how their interview went, they might come to hate the company and write nasty things about it. This happens quite often, by the way. No matter how hard you try, if you don't proactively manage the candidate experience, if you just passively reject them without paying attention to the process, you might be creating a potential group of people who hate your company. Imagine a typical company with 1,000 employees. Standard turnover rate. Let's take a small one, 15%. That's 150 positions the company fills each year. And let's take a typical recruitment funnel, not the biggest one. 100 applicants per position. We're already getting 150 times 100, which is 15,000. So out of a potential 15,000 candidates, you're only hiring 150. You'll potentially create 14,850 people who dislike your company if you don't manage the candidate experience properly. But over 10 years, that's like an entire town of people who hate your company. And that's bad. A good experience, on the other hand, enhances the employer brand and increases the likelihood of offer acceptance. A candidate might not get the job, but they could become a customer, partner, or return later. That's why it's important to leave a good impression. If you look at it, especially in the long term, every interaction is important. For example, I worked in recruitment for 15 years and was either a recruiter myself or led the recruitment team. Imagine how many people have gone through me, my recruiters, and my employees. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Fortunately, I've always tried to create a good impression, no matter where or how. But even in my case, there are some detractors who chase after me and try to leave negative comments somewhere. Most often, these are people whom I personally didn't hire. Some are people who competed with me for a position and I was chosen, but I'm powerless in this case because I didn't interact with them directly. Out of hundreds of thousands, there's still a small number of such people. That's why it's extremely important to keep this small number super small. Because if you don't manage this, it can grow into a group of thousands or more people, and it can become a toxic community that will cause significant harm. So here's the key idea. A candidate is not just a person you're evaluating. That's a very old, outdated Soviet approach. This is a person who is simultaneously evaluating you as an employer, and they leave with that assessment. In other words, in your eyes, this might be a candidate who isn't worth your attention. You will never hire them, but they will still be evaluating you. They will still form an impression of you, and then they will share it. If you somehow, in some way, you can offend a person even with your inattention. They applied, got no response, imagined something, got offended, upset, and went out to spread negativity in the world. Here are examples comparing good and bad experiences. Let us look at the main stages and options. Good versus bad candidate experience. First impression, good experience, clear and attractive job description, easy application process, bad experience, unclear job description, complicated application process. I remember when I was still a junior specialist, I would look at job openings and apply. Sometimes companies use the Taleo system. This system was so terrible that you send your resume and then you basically have to enter all the points from your resume again into a large multi-page questionnaire. The application process took half an hour. There were tons of pages. It was awful. Later, when I realized such a system existed and saw job postings in the Taleo system, I simply avoided them. Response speed. Fast, meaning you responded within 1 or 2 days. Maybe automatically confirmed receipt of the resume. This, by the way, is the very first thing I did at the STB TV channel. We immediately set up with the IT department an automatic notification system for all incoming resumes or curriculum vitae, stating that we received them and will review them soon. And a bad experience would be no reaction at all or a response after several weeks. I have encountered this when, for example, a recruiter calls a person and says, "Oh, I emailed you 2 weeks ago, a month ago." Communication can be polite, personalized, and timely, or it can be formal, impolite, late, and repetitive. Interviews can be structured, respectful, and transparent, or chaotic with unprepared interviewers who, sometimes give the impression that they did not want to interview anyone at all, as if they were suddenly pulled from somewhere and forced to ask random questions. Feedback can be specific and timely with recommendations, or it can be absent, generic, or late. Candidate engagement. Either the candidate feels valued and part of the process. When I worked at ID, we asked every candidate, "How do you like our selection process? Share your impression, it's very important to us." People were shocked to be asked such a question. Many said, "Oh, I've never been asked that before. It's so cool that you're interested." This is so important. And people, even to the point of rejecting other companies in favor of ours. We had such a case. There was a candidate who was hired by Genesis. At that time, it was a much bigger company than us, much cooler, but we were a little late with him and made him a job offer a bit late. He was already working for them. But he remembered the experience he had with us, so he quit there and came to work for us after all. And a bad experience is when a candidate feels ignored or undervalued, and the company's image after the process. The company is perceived as professional and caring if it's a good experience, or disorganized and disrespectful to people if it's bad, and the likelihood of recommending the company. It's high when a candidate will recommend the company even without an offer. This is the coolest sign that you've built a truly good relationship with the candidate. You rejected the person, but they still recommend you saying, "Listen, it's such a great company. They didn't hire me, but I loved how we interacted with them." And it's low when the candidate ends up sharing negative experiences on forums and in reviews, the consequences of a bad experience for the business and brand. Why is this important? It's not just about convenience for the candidate. It's a factor directly affecting business performance and the company's reputation as an employer. Moreover, it affects the overall perception of the brand. The close connection between employer brand and company brand has been proven for many years. That is, people, customers, don't really want to interact with a company that has a bad reputation as an employer. This means that such a company even has worse customer relations. So the consequences for the employer brand. Well, first of all, negative reviews on those sites that exist in a particular country where the candidate is interviewing. Not only does he write bad reviews, but the overall rating of the company goes down, people see it, and it's bad. Candidates share negative experiences on social media, creating a word-of-mouth effect that's difficult to control afterwards. Moreover, people might, exaggerate a bit, make something up, and you can't stop it anymore. Haters will start to dislike you and add their own negative comments. Trust in the recruiting process decreases. Even an offer might be viewed with suspicion. Loss of repeat candidates, meaning some candidates won't want to return in the future, and a company with a bad reputation can't make it to the top of the best employers rankings. What will this mean for the business as a whole? Hiring costs will increase. That is, it will just keep growing like a bonfire, and you'll have to pay more to hire people. And in general, this is bad from a business perspective. The time to hire will increase. Strong candidates drop out. You're not confident in your ability to successfully convert job offers into hires. You'll be nervous about making job offers, hoping they'll be accepted when they might not be. There will be a decrease in conversion rates at different stages of the funnel and a drop in loyalty to the brand and product. People may reject the company as a service provider, and you could lose talent. They might go to your competitors and even do something out of spite. Here are some figures from research in this area. 60% of candidates say they would share negative hiring experiences publicly, according to research. 1 in 3 candidates rejects an offer if they don't receive timely feedback. Unfortunately, I've experienced this in my practice. That's why in all the companies I've worked for, I've established clear deadlines for all stages. Because when you hear that you could have called earlier and you realize you've lost a candidate, it's bad. 65% of consumers lose interest in a brand after a bad experience as a candidate. There's a great study by Renstat on candidate experience management, and it also mentions these figures. 82% of candidates research a company before completing the application process, that is, before responding to a job posting. 48% of job seekers use job boards to find vacancies. 34% use social networks. 60% of job seekers never complete the application process, especially if it's long and cumbersome. 34% of job seekers didn't receive a response within 60 days, and only 7% reported being notified that they didn't get the job. In other words, they're simply being ignored. 78% of employers think they communicate well with candidates, while candidates are half as likely to think they're being communicated with well. 83% of job seekers say employers can improve the candidate experience simply by providing clear timelines for the hiring process. We'll be looking at how to inform candidates about this in the course. Where candidates check reputation. Here's the Arnstadt study, and as you can see, candidates know where to look and they search in many places. They don't apply randomly, especially if they're people who aren't actively job hunting, whom you're headhunting. Believe me, they'll go through every possible source to gather information about you. And if you have a bad reputation, you're in trouble. The key idea is that a bad candidate experience isn't just a reputational mistake, it's a real direct loss in hiring, money, and trust in your business. What research says about the impact of candidate experience on loyalty, Glassdoor ratings, and willingness to respond? There's a metric that comes from marketing. It's called Net Promoter Score, or NPS. It's also used to assess candidate loyalty and evaluate candidate experience. It's a loyalty index that shows how willing your candidates are to recommend your company to others. It's calculated simply at any stage of the interview process. You send the candidate a questionnaire asking how likely they are to recommend our company as an employer to others, using a scale from 0 to 10, and the answers are interpreted. If it's 9 or 10, these are promoters. If it's 7 or 8, these are passives. And if it's 0 to 6, these are detractors. And your net loyalty level is the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. That's how easy it is to evaluate a candidate's experience with just one question. Why is this important? If you have a high candidate NPS, you have a strong brand and high conversion rates at all stages of the funnel. Conversely, if you see that you have a low NPS, or worst of all, if it's negative, it's just a disaster. A person hasn't even worked with you yet, but already has a negative impression, which will lead to negativity on the internet, offer rejections, bad feedback, and so on. That's why many large companies with a huge number of hires, Unilever, Google, Amazon, they measure NPS after each stage. This doesn't mean that every candidate gets the same questions after each stage over and over again. No, there's simply segmentation and sampling. We ask some candidates at this stage and other candidates at another stage, at a different stage. We get an understanding of all stages, but of course we don't bombard candidates with our surveys or pester them. Glassdoor and other platforms. So, there are many sources of feedback about the hiring process where people write, share their experiences, and even start writing without waiting for an offer. They go to an interview, come back and write about it, and read what others write. One negative review can scare away dozens of strong candidates, and then it's displayed everywhere. All your reviews about you are in all searches, aggregators, and so on. Moreover, ChatGPT perceives Glassdoor as a trusted source. ChatGPT forms its impression of your company based on, among other things, the reviews about you on Glassdoor. So, when a person asks ChatGPT, "I'm a brand manager, which companies should I apply to?" it will say, these companies have high ratings on Glassdoor. This means you can even fall out of favor with artificial intelligence due to poor ratings. Impact on responses and conversion. Bad experience means fewer responses to job openings, which means it's harder to fill positions. Low engagement from candidates means less preparation for interviews, which means poor results. So people come to you, and you might think they've shown up unprepared and not actively responding. Candidates who feel disrespected are less likely to accept an offer. Examples. A candidate didn't receive feedback, so they left a star rating on Glassdoor after the interview. For example, A candidate didn't receive a timely response from the company, wrote a post on LinkedIn, and got a lot of reactions. Poor communication, rejection of an offer, and you might lose a contract with a client if it's a sales manager, for example. The key idea is that a candidate's experience today is the company's public rating tomorrow, and it will affect the company for quite a long time until you improve the experience for a large number of people. Overview of a typical candidate journey. So, in this course, we'll be examining in detail the concept of the candidate journey. This is the sequence of stages that a candidate goes through in their interaction with a company. And each stage is a touch point where the candidate's experience, impressions, and attitude towards the employer are formed. We will learn how to improve the experience at each stage. What specific actions can be taken at each stage to ensure an excellent experience in the end? Well, here's a typical example of the stages in a candidate journey. Attraction, response, initial communication, interview, decision, and onboarding, or overall after effect. There's a description of what happens, and already here are brief ideas on how to improve. So in the course, we'll be examining this in detail. Not like here, which is just a superficial map. We'll look at each stage under a microscope, so to speak, and consider the best practices. I'll share my experience, plus we'll look at what's generally accepted and can be used to make candidates simply fall in love with the company. What else? Of course, we're talking more about hiring, but it's important to continue this and to connect it with the other stages. For example, the company restart, which I mentioned today. They conduct a lot of research on employer branding, how people change jobs, how they choose jobs. But they also say that you should look at the entire life cycle of a candidate after hiring, all the way to their departure. There's also work to be done there. But all the post-hiring stages are beyond the scope of this course. In this course, we only focus on hiring. Important elements at each stage. Well, first of all, it's the tone. How the company sounds in communications. Any letter, message, job posting, any kind of communication from you, this is already a kind of tone of voice. And it needs to be examined and evaluated. Do you sound too formal? Do you sound too authoritarian, one-sided, as if you're the only one making decisions here? Next is consistency. Is there a gap between expectations and reality? You know, some companies have paid a lot of attention to how they communicate and shape expectations, but they haven't thought at all about how they actually do all of this in reality. So a person receives beautiful letters, gets a cool message, and then comes to the company where executives talk to them in an almost abusive manner. Speed is very important. When I was building recruitment processes in 3 companies, hiring speed was my main focus. Nobody likes delays. This is absolutely not allowed, not allowed. And inclusivity, meaning people should feel equally respected regardless of how their interview went, how they presented themselves, who they are, what they represent, and so on. What can be added to the journey? We can use a visual map, we'll talk about it and learn how to build one. You can audit your existing journey and identify bottlenecks. I'm sure you have them there. We'll be analyzing that too. Key idea. The hiring process is not a filter, but a journey that should be comfortable, understandable, and dignified for every candidate, even if they don't get the job. And company case studies that work with candidate experience. For example, Unilever. The company is a cool brand, well-known, large. They use technologies. For example, they use HireVue for video interviews and Pymetrics tests. Candidates receive instant feedback and an invitation to the next stage via email. The process for candidates is completely transparent, predictable, and automated. Therefore, their hiring is fast, they have high candidate loyalty, good reviews on Glassdoor, and they save on recruitment costs. And for example, let's not specify which retail company. Vacancies are posted. This is true, by the way, for many retail companies. Many of these companies get anxious when vacancies are posted, but responses are rarely processed. There are few candidates, and few candidates receive responses. Interviewers ask personal or inappropriate questions about private life, and candidates write negative reviews on various websites. And here's the result. Decrease in responses, hiring problems, low ratings, loss of several potential clients. Or another good option is when it's Canva. Each candidate receives a thank you letter, regardless of the outcome. By the way, at Ideals, when we were hiring a CTO, to all the candidates who completed the test task for the CTO role, we gave gifts, our branded backpack, and they were pleased, saying, "Wow, that's cool. I've never had that done for me before." And we said, "Thank you for spending your time. Unfortunately, we're not choosing you, but we want to give you a gift," and people were simply delighted. Offers are accompanied by a video message from the future manager. It's elementary to record such a video message, for example, using software. Regular collection of feedback through short surveys. The result? Candidates themselves share positivity on social media, high offer acceptance rate, and a positive brand without an expensive EVP. Or, for example, some IT company. A bunch of interview stages, no coordination, repeated questions at different stages, so the person says, I've already been asked this. The candidate doesn't receive final feedback, and as a result, the candidate shares their frustration on Facebook. They don't accept the offer, and this turns into some negativity. The HR department doesn't know, sees some post, HR gets blamed, managers are at fault, and overall, it's not good. Therefore, the conclusion is that candidate experience is already a competitive advantage today if built correctly. Each stage affects the perception of the company. Even a rejection can be delivered with such respect that it will leave a positive impression on the candidate. Homework. Let's try to describe the candidate journey in your company, highlighting 3 strengths and 3 problem areas. There will be a guide here to help you complete the homework. Next, we'll talk about the structure and stages of the selection process. We'll continue to delve into some tools, tips, life hacks, and so on. That's all for today. Thank you to everyone who was online with me. I invite you to take this course for those who are already on the course. See you in a week. Bye-bye.